Alrighty, so this is where we're going to start things off. Welcome on in to everyone who does not know me. My name is Archdruid Dre. Um, I am a doc main, and recently the PTB was updated for the new chapter, but we also received some pretty surprising changes to the Doctor. And let's just say it's quite some extensive changes that they are planning on doing here. I had the pleasure to check them out. I'm going to go over them rather quickly, what they are, because there's a lot here. Um, and after I do that, I'll give my thoughts on it. We'll move on to ideas on how to deal with Doc's current issues in his base kit, and that'll be what we're doing today. So, what are they doing to our good boy, the Doctor? Well, for one, they're changing slightly how madness goes up. Before, it was a little bit more finicky, I guess you could say, but I don't see why it was that big of an issue. Uh, they're going to make it so madness no longer passively decays when you have madness that hasn't quite reached another tier. So madness will just keep where it is until you hit tier 3, and then you snap out of it, head back to tier 1. They're going to make it so shock therapy now will give you half of a tier of madness to a survivor when they're hit by it. Static blast will give you a full level of madness. That's not really a huge change between live and PTB because, as you can see before, the numbers were a little bit different. Static Blast gave 50, Shock Therapy gave 30, you needed 105 to get Tier 3. If you're just spam shocking, it'll take you 6 shocks. If you were spam shocking before, it would have taken you 4. So, in that aspect, if you're just shocking like that, it's a slight nerf, but it's not really the big issue here. The big issue is that madness used to decay, and that was part of something that survivors could do to help counterplay the madness mechanics, and that's going away. And I don't really agree with that change. I feel like survivors should be able to actively do something like avoid the killer or go into a locker and be able to have the madness like be blocked or regressed. I don't know. It just seems like a very weird change to his base kit, base mechanics. Some of the other big changes to Doctor here, though, some of the biggest ones of them all, is they literally are going through and changing pretty much every single one of Doc's add-ons, buffing them, tweaking them, and removing a lot of the negatives and sort of balancing out a few of the others. Uh, this would be all fine and good and everything if it were pretty much like if they had addressed the issues with the Doc Space Kit. Like the add-on changes, the ideas here, the numbers and everything are pretty good. The main issue that clashes with these changes is Doc's current main issue, which stems from his shock therapy's cooldown. After Doc's update, they lowered Doc's shock therapy cooldown from 3 seconds on the PTB to 1.5. This has lended him to essentially just be able to spam shock willy-nilly, not really having to worry about timing things properly, being able to sync it up with Survivor going towards a pallet or a window, and generally it's just not that fun to play against. Both from my own experience of playing against doctors as well as also playing as doctor. So some of these changes are kind of nice. I will say that the order add-ons used to give you give additional madness from your static blast. It's now the passive on them is going to make it so static blast has a slightly lower cooldown. I feel like that's pretty okay for to have as an add-on. My only issue with add-ons doing something like this is add-ons should not be just straight buffs to a killer's base kit. I feel like they should tweak the killer's kit to make it play slightly different. I don't feel like add-ons should just be a straight bam, now I'm stronger just because I have this item on. I don't feel like that should be the case, but maybe that's just my own opinion. Um, they're also normalizing all afflictions across the board. They're making it so the only thing that changes between rarity of add-ons is the base passive effect on the add-on. The affliction part is the same across all rarities on each different affliction, which, in my opinion, that's actually a pretty good change. That makes it a little easier to understand for newer players. That's a smart change. Um, I don't really have any issues with that. That's actually not too bad. Anyways, we're moving on. Discipline. This is where we come into some issues with what I was discussing on Doc's clashing with Doc's base kit. And that is discipline used to give increased shock, like madness with your shock therapy. Now it's going to lower the detonation delay after you finish charging your shock and to when it hits the survivor. That is something I've wanted on Doc's kit for a very, 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 very long time. However, the issue stems with the numbers in Doc's base kit. Currently, it takes you 1 second to charge his shock, and you have a 1 second delay from when it finishes charging to when it hits, and then they're locked out for 2.5 seconds. After you finish charging your shock, you have a 1.5 second cooldown on his shock. So essentially, it'll be about 0.5 seconds into the effect that's on the survivor, which is kind of not really okay because you'll be able to immediately charge the shock for 1 second, and then it'll be another full second before it hits, and that's right when the debuff is removed from the survivor. So the numbers don't line up here, just baseline. And then when you throw this into the mix, even just one of these, it makes it even more bullshit, in my opinion here. And it's not even really an opinion, it's more of a fact just by the numbers, because the delay lowering makes it so you can just spam shock willy-nilly, and it's even more oppressive than it currently is on live servers. It'll allow people to do some very, very scummy shit. Most of which revolves around just denying of hooks by just spam shocking. I don't I don't see it as an issue of being able to, like if somebody was like dive bombing a hook and you charge a shock, get it properly timed, and then you like hit them and then hit them again or grab them off the hook as they're going for the unhook. I don't see that part being an issue. I see the issue of just being unable to completely be able to rescue from the hook just because the dock is spam shocking at the hook. I don't really think that should ever be a thing. And that is a huge issue. That's like this change right here, along with them not addressing the cooldown on shock therapy, I think is probably the biggest issue with the dock changes coming. I don't want to stay too much on this, but those are just some of my heavy thoughts on this. I will get back to some of my tweaks in a little bit once we finish going through these. Moving on to Restraint, they didn't really touch Restraint much other than making the Affliction just completely um, sit here at the same amount of time across the board. The Aura Reveal on the add-ons stayed the same. They didn't really touch Restraint too terribly much. Still one of his best add-ons, if not his best, just for sheer information. Gonna just move on that one. And then we go to Calm. This one, they slightly buffed the yellow one, because the yellow one before was 4 meter increase in reduction, and the brown one was 2. So slight buffs on the passive side of things here. It's not a bad idea. And they made the Affliction actually more, I guess, reliable and consistent, because on the tooltips for the add-ons, it was very, 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 very confusing, and not necessarily an add-on Affliction that had a lot of impact. So, all in all, not too many changes on the Calm add-ons. Overall, it's pretty solid still. Ninja Doc is still very much alive, and a slight buff to it. Moving on to another pretty massive change that is going in place here. The Obedience add-on for reverse skill checks. They are actually removing this add-on, even though it's been only in the game for about 4 or 5 weeks now. And they're going to make reverse skill checks baseline into his madness. And to this I say, why? Why are they doing this? This, I don't really agree with this change. They're completely removing this add-on after they just put it, like, this effect in place with his update. And now they're going to make it completely baseline across the board, removing the add-on. And in its place, they're putting scrap tape back in. So we're going to have Donut again. And I'm like, why? But why? I'm a little dumbfounded by this. Impossible skill check builds. I know a lot of people say they have fun with it and everything. I don't think it's a healthy sort of build path for Doc. It's not really interactive between killer survivor. It's more of just fucking with the survivors for the sake of fucking with survivors. I don't really agree with it. I don't feel like this should be baseline. That's a little bit of a buff that doesn't need to be in place. Doc's true strength lies not in like tear radius and anti-skill check builds. It revolves heavily around his being able to locate people and chasing them effectively with his shock therapy. That is a pretty bad change in my opinion. I don't think that should be the case. Moving on to Erie King. They actually made Erie King not garbage. Like, for the longest time, I've despised this add-on. Anyone who knows me and talks to me on my streams or whatnot knows that I have a deep-seated hate for this add-on. Mostly because it leads to a very boring sort of playstyle. Before, you had 5 afflictions, and you had to shock survivors 5 times to apply all 5 afflictions. So, in order to get the true value out of this add-on, you had to shock every survivor 5 times for a grand total of minimum of 20 shocks across all 4 survivors. It was just dog shit for time efficiency, effectiveness, and the benefit was very marginal at best. Now, they're making it so that as soon as somebody is in madness, they gain all 4 of the Doctor's remaining afflictions: Calm, Discipline, Order, and Restraint. And I'm like, holy shit. They made it really simple to understand, and it's actually more potent because you're able to get the value out of it like almost immediately. And that is a pretty significant buff to that add-on. Alrighty. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. It's just literally they made it from being not that great of an add-on into a very potent monster of an add-on. Uh, Moving on to the electrodes, all of the range add-ons. Before they had like a percentage increase on the range and then a charge speed reduction. With the PTB changes here, they are completely and utterly removing the downsides to it and just doing a flat number across the board on each of the different electrodes, while at the same time nerfing the range down to 10 meters. On live, it is 10.7. The range is being nerfed down a little bit. I'm like, I'm not too terribly happy about that. But they did make it so the electrodes are a little bit more easier to understand rather than just percentages and having to do math because math. They made it so moldy gives 2, polish gives 3, high stimulus gives 4. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The only issue that, well, not necessarily issue, the only thing with these range changes is they did slightly nerf Sniper Doc. Before the dock update, you would do interview tape with high stimulus electrode, which gave 75% range back then, and it would make it so your interview tape shock therapies would go out 35 meters. To help compensate with that, they bumped up interview tape's base range to 24, so the new max range that you can get is 28 meters. So it's a pretty significant nerf to Sniper Doc. I'm alright with that because I don't usually play around with totem shaman builds, which generally this is what you would use when you're doing those types of builds. So, all in all, a lot of changes coming to Doc. I don't quite understand why they are making some of these changes how they are. All in all, like the main issue comes down to Doc's base kit is a little bit overtuned. Well, quite a bit overtuned after his update. Some of the things that I would recommend to maybe help fix and or tweak him would be changing either his shock therapy cooldown, which I honestly like. That's my biggest tweak and thought process on it all is his shock therapy cooldown needs to go up to between 2 to 2.5 seconds. I don't feel like 3 is. I feel like 3 would be overkill. 2 to 2.5 is a good happy medium. It would prevent the main issue, which is shock denial spamming on hooks, and it would make it so you would have to put a little bit more thought into your shocks around loops. That's like the main tweak that I feel like would be very useful to help out Doc. Because right now he lacks a lot of finesse in his kit when they simplified his kit. And I want them to put some of that finesse back into him, some of the thought process, some of the timing and thinking, because that's what makes Doc a lot of fun. Has always been you would have to think things out, plan when to swap for your shock back when there were stances, and knowing when to put it away. Like it was all a huge mental gymnastics sort of thing where you had to focus and do things properly in order to get the satisfying hits. One of my other tweaks a little while back, I tweeted out this little paint diagram that I did to maybe adjust Doc's cone, because right now his cone is rather oppressing because it's way too easy to land. That's like the big issue is like his his big old cone is way too easy to fucking hit. Um, and it completely shuts down a fair number of areas that would normally have play potential. Shack being the biggest one, because you don't even really have to necessarily aim when somebody's running into Shack. You just turn and charge your shock, and bam, it hits them. Pretty much most of Shack gets hit by his cone, and that I don't really feel like that should be the case. I feel like you should have to have some room, some wiggle room for survivors to be able to counterplay and avoid. Um, my only thing here with this idea here is it would make it so if people are just like running at you to avoid the shock, it would do a little pulse around you, so that way if they're like running into you, you can still shock them. So like they can't just run straight into you. They would have to think more of going to the sides and avoiding the shock. Um, so this would be like this distance right here would be his base range of 10 meters. I don't know if it should go to a very, very fixed point like this, or if it ends at like a 1 meter width at the very tip of it. It was just a basic idea I came up with. And this diagram is more of a 3 meter wide shock pulse. Um, and I came up with this one because I feel like it's like a happy medium between this and his cone. It's not as wide as his cone, and um, there will still be a little bit more wiggle room for survivors to be able to play on either side. No, like have a little bit of time to maybe react, avoid the shock, be able to get the distance they need to maybe get a pallet or a window. It leads to proper counterplay in a killer's kit, and that is one of the main ideas here. Hmm. Well, yeah. Yo, I just saw your message in chat. Uh, if they were to do something like this, they would probably bump up the range a little bit, like the base range, and that would make perfect sense. But this was just a couple basic ideas that I came up with to try to help put a little bit of finesse and a little bit of skill back into Doc's kit, which honestly is like the main killer that I play. I feel like the killer should be fun to play and also fun to play against. And right now, it's going in the direction of not being necessarily very fun to go against, and that makes me sad. So, anyways, without further ado, I'm going to wrap things up here. Thank you guys very much for joining me on this little video. I wanted to get out of the way, get my thoughts down in some form. I hope you guys found some helpful thoughts on my opinions for Doc, and hopefully this little overview will help maybe change Doc for the better in the future. Thank you guys so much for that, and I will see you guys in another video. Have a good one.